All right, good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. Really appreciate you making time on this Wednesday afternoon to meet with the Tax Revision Commission. I'm Nick Johnson. I'm the Executive Director of the DC Tax Revision Commission. I'm joined here by three other commissioners at this point: Yeshua Cyan, Erica Williams, Carolyn Rudd, two of our staff, Becky Strauss and Mike Higeman. And I expect a couple of other commissioners to come wandering in over the course of the next little while. This is the nth, I'm not sure how many, we've done a whole bunch of really good, 11, someone's counting that, thank you. Meetings with different stakeholders representing different sectors of the DC economy, different perspectives on what we'll be doing here, advocacy groups, and so on. And we've also had several public meetings in public town halls and community meetings with members of the public, and as well as a number of expert presentations over the course of the last number of months. And a consistent theme that we've heard over and over again is about how housing affordability is playing a key role in shaping the outcomes of where our economy heads. And as I'll share in a moment, outcomes for our economy is one of the key things we're thinking about as a commission. So today's panel focuses on affordable housing developers and stakeholders, and we're very grateful to have all of you here. I'll say a few more words about the commission and the work we're doing, where we are in the process, and then I'll give you a chance to introduce yourselves and say a little bit about. And we've found that these meetings work best when there really are an opportunity to have a conversation. These guys are not shy about having BD questions for you all to dig into. We are recording and streaming this meeting, and we typically have a few folks joining from home. This is the speaker in front of you. To the extent you can, direct your words towards it. It's okay at picking up voices, but not great. So we'll do our best. Yes, please come up to the table. So just a few words about the commission. I think maybe you already know this, but at the risk of saying what you already know, the commission is an 11-member body, 5 appointed by the mayor, 5 appointed by the council. The CFO serves ex officio, given the broad task of reviewing the entire DC tax system and recommending changes. The commission is convened every 10 years by statute with that broad mandate. And so this commission was established last year, members were appointed last year. Our plan and our hope is to have recommendations that go to the council and the mayor by the end of this calendar year. So far we have been in listening mode, and we remain in listening mode. So we're really excited to have you put your thoughts and ideas and wisdom and experiences on the table for us to process and hear. Beginning in September, the members of the commission will be diving in to the question of, all right, what actually should be in this package of recommendations? The principles that the commissioners have agreed to are as follows. We're going to try to come up with a package of recommendations that will, it's not necessarily an order of importance, but that will be that will advance us in 4 areas. One is to create a tax code that is resilient for a post-COVID economy so that we can fund services fairly and sustainably into the future. The second principle is we want a tax code that advances progressivity and racial equity so that all families in the district can thrive. A third is around economic efficiency and competitiveness, given our position with our jurisdictional neighbors very close by. That's a huge importance to this commission. And the third is to have a tax system that is simple and reasonably easy for people to comply with. And in addition to those substantive outcomes that we're shooting for, we're trying to do our work in accordance to 3 other principles. One is following the data and the research, so listening to experts, looking at what the numbers are telling us. A second is doing what we're doing right now, listening to the voices of people across the community and really trying to hear what a range of people have to say. And then a third is to try to work as a body that has a range of perspectives and experiences, the commission itself, to try to come to consensus around a strong package of recommendations that we can be behind as a group. So that's where we're coming from. As I said, we're in listening mode. At this point, everything's on the table. We have not taken any positions on sort of this is what we're for, this is what we're not for. I will say that we did have a discussion early on as to whether regulatory issues or issues on the spending side of the budget should be part of our mandate, and the commission decided with input from the council that that was not part of our remit. We're really focusing on taxes. Obviously, taxes connect to those other things, but just bear that in mind as you as we have our conversations here. Before I go on, anything else I should say about our work generally? Okay. So what I would suggest, and Ryan and I had a little back and forth about this, is that we start with Ryan sharing a bit of an overview of affordable housing issues in the district, and how this coalition is operating, thinking about those challenges, and then we'll go around and each of you can introduce yourself. I'm very grateful that we had a number of, I think 6 folks submitted written testimony, and that's great, super helpful for the record. I read them all, and they will all be on the website. They did hit some similar themes, and we don't need to hear those multiple. So I think you guys have sorted out who's gonna articulate some of those different themes, and then so we can get through your high points, and then as I say, we'll talk about both what you guys came prepared to talk about, but we may have other questions relating to what you think about. And like I said, we haven't taken positions yet, so if we throw questions off the wall at you, or hard questions or whatever, it doesn't mean we'll be determined because we won't see anything. That makes sense. Yeah. All right. So with that, I will turn it over to you.
Okay. Good afternoon, members of the commission. First, thank you so much for inviting us to come and share our perspectives and have this conversation with you. My name is Ryan Trout. I am the Chief Housing Officer at the Coalition for Nonprofit Housing and Economic Development. Established in 2000, CNEGD is an association of about 180 organizational members working to foster just and equitable community development solutions that address the needs and aspirations of low and moderate income District of Columbia residents. My hope through my testimony is to kind of set the landscape of need and just kind of help level set with where we are with affordable housing. One very fortunate thing is just today at 10 a.m., the National Low Income Housing Coalition published a report called Out of Reach. And so I'm going to summarize some of their findings and then turn it over to this illustrious panel of industry experts who will be able to talk more deeply on a number of issues. So few investments offer greater long-term impact for inclusion and equity than affordable housing. A few factors affect health and prosperity more than where you live. To promote equity and inclusion now and in the future, the district must invest heavily in safe, healthy, affordable housing. Research shows that increasing access to affordable housing is the most cost-effective strategy for reducing childhood poverty and increasing economic mobility in the United States. Stanford economist Raj Chetty found that children who moved to more affluent neighborhoods saw their earnings as adults increase by approximately 31%. They had an increased likelihood of living in better neighborhoods as adults and a lower likelihood of becoming a single parent. Moreover, children living in stable, affordable homes are more likely to thrive in school and have greater opportunities to learn inside and outside the classroom. Removing health hazards like asthma triggers and fall risks from the home makes for healthier families and lower healthcare costs. Decreasing housing costs for cost-burdened households releases resources to spend on nutritious food and healthcare and limits overcrowding to minimize the spread of infectious diseases. Home ownership also promotes wealth building for low-income households and households of color, helping families secure their future as they build home equity. But to ensure that we're protecting the district's most vulnerable residents and acting in a way that help alleviate racial and economic inequalities, we must protect programs that secure the basic needs of individuals and families, including affordable housing. In 2019, Mayor Bowser stated that when people have access to safe and stable housing, that is the first step toward having access to a safe and stable life. Her statement was true before COVID-19, and it resonates even more strongly today. Housing is the key to reducing intergenerational poverty and increasing economic mobility. But currently, affordable housing is difficult to find in the district. Today, the National Low Income Housing Coalition released its annual Out of Reach report. according to the report, 58% of district households are renters. The average fair market rent for a two-bedroom rental in the district is over $1,800. A renter household needs an annual income of over $73,500 to afford a two-bedroom rental home at that fair market rent, which translates to a full-time job that pays at least $35 an hour. That is the sixth highest rental or wage that's needed nationally to afford that rent. However, if the renter is a minimum wage earner, she or he would need to work 83 hours a week to afford the same two-bedroom apartment, more than two full-time jobs. This is why the production and preservation of affordable housing is so important. And as you are aware, a critical component of the creation and preservation of affordable housing is the Housing Production Trust Fund. The HPTF continues to be the primary tool that enables affordable housing developers and renters wishing to exercise their tenant opportunity to purchase rights to preserve or create affordable rental or homeownership housing across all 8 wards of the district. Tonight, you're going to hear from various expert practitioners in the affordable housing ecosystem, and our hope is that our combined testimonies showcase the importance of the connection between the deed and recordation tax and how important it is through the Housing Production Trust Fund, which in turn produces net new units, it preserves existing affordable units, and empowers tenants to negotiate better living conditions, fair and predictable rental structures, or perhaps leverage to purchase a home through TOPA. Affordable housing is essential to producing a fair, just, and equitable city where residents are able to access opportunities for themselves and their families. Thank you for this opportunity to testify this evening, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jim.
Hey, good afternoon, y'all. Really appreciate your service on this commission and the opportunity to talk to you. My name is Jim Knight, and I work with Jubilee Housing, nonprofit housing developer and manager and services provider, about to turn 50 later this year. Our work is primarily in Adams Morgan, Columbia Heights, and Mount Pleasant neighborhoods. And we rely on this trust fund that has been referenced here a moment ago, have developed over 10 properties in the last decade or so using the fund, and have another 8 properties under development that will depend on it. So another voice to reinforce the importance of the trust fund for delivering this deeply affordable housing, and obviously its connection to the tax. I'm going to take a minute, if you don't mind, just to walk through some ancient history to describe some of the conditions that preceded the tax and why we think it was it's a particularly useful tool. So the trust fund law was initially passed in 1988, was not initially funded until 2003. Heads are nodding. Tough to deliver the political will, needed to find an annual appropriation to create something that's new, and you don't know if it's going to work. And so in 2003, it was first attached to voting 15% of the deed and recordation taxes. This sort of stepped over that political hurdle, and it also said to the marketplace, this is going to happen year over year. It takes a while to go from purchasing a property to redeveloping it to renting it. The capital is going to be there. You can trust it, marketplace. A key feature of the percent, so I'm trying not to cross your line about spending the money, but the 15% goes into the pot, and excuse me, lost my train of thought. Oh, that amount goes up and down with the real estate market. So in a hot market, there's more revenue. Cold market, there's less revenue. So it's dedicated now, but it's not reliable. So it was 2010 when DC Council responded to that and set a floor for the fund at $100 million. So the greater of the annual tax percentage for $100 million, and it was 2013 before Mayor Gray was the first one to actually fund that floor. And then Mayor Bowser's kept it there as a floor, and we celebrated success now in producing just over 20,000 units since its inception. So we're talking about a really effective tool for creating affordable housing. And I think I was going to lobby you a little bit to consider increasing that tax percentage, to look at what it would take to get it to that 100% or that 100 million floor, so that no mayor, no council would have to find that extra money each time, and it's already there. To consider putting in place inflationary component, so that, well, I looked at the average per unit cost of the trust fund in the early days was around 70,000 per unit produced, and now it's almost 170,000. That's just market inflation over time. So anything we can do to devote a higher percentage of that tax would be well appreciated and well spent. So that's my comments on the relationship between the tax and the trust fund. The second topic that I'd like to raise with you is relates to charitable purposes and when they are exempt from taxes. So in a lot of affordable housing developments, we'll have housing upstairs and we'll have a social services downstairs, early childhood development center and after-school programming, health clinic, something like that. To use the sophisticated financing that's now available, the low-income housing tax credit, the new market tax credit, those kinds of tools require you to create the special purpose entity that own that piece of the property. And that's a taxable entity, usually an LLC. Even when the nonprofit wholly owns that LLC and has absolute control over that activity, OTR is rendering a decision that that's not a tax exempt use. So that's driving up the cost of that development. It's making it harder for us to find those nonprofit partners who can play that role. So that's sort of an eligibility issue. We'd like to see that definition expanded to, it's really about the charitable purpose, whether or not that happens on the site, not what the ownership structure is that's holding the service. Second, that's sort of eligibility. Here's my last point. OTR then adjudicates and makes a decision on this. And the decision-making process is forever long and full of risk for that nonprofit. It's usually a 2 to 3 year process. That decision does not get rendered until the property use is put into service. The development timeline is 2, 3, and 4 years. So the group has to make a decision: are we going to pay this tax that we don't think we should owe, and then wait 3.5, 4 years and apply to have it be refunded, which, good luck, sometimes you get it and sometimes you don't. Or do we not pay it, take the risk that we are going to be required later to come up with that whole pile of money with penalties and interest? It is a really tough dilemma that these providers are in. Jubilee is that person a lot of the time. So we think that patterning after the low-income housing tax credit abatement program is the way to go here. Let the project apply up front with that use, have it be contingently approved on it, eventually be put into place, like you said. So those are my two thoughts there. Happy to question later. Thank you for letting me share.
Hi.
Hey.
Hello.
Pause for a second. Welcome, Commissioner Member Jody McClay. Yeah, no problem at all.
Thank
Welcome.
you.
We're still in the introductory remarks.
Awesome.
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Good afternoon, members of the Commission. My name is Juan Pablo Agatero. I'm here today representing Mi Casa Inc. Mi Casa is an affordable housing nonprofit dedicated to providing quality affordable housing to the city residents at very and extremely low income levels, the majority of whom identify as immigrants, Latino, or Black. I've been working in the city for the last 30 years. We have developed work with tenant associations, limited equity cooperatives. We have been developing around almost 20 limited equity co-ops in town. We provide technical assistance to tenants and to co-op members that are going through the process of developing their buildings and owning their properties. The city's read and recordation tax is the foundation and the fuel for the Housing Production Trust Fund. The tax not only provides funding, but is a predictable and dedicated source of funding, not discretionary. Why is this important? The Housing Production Trust Fund is the critical tool of power for the Tenant Opportunity and Purchase Act, TOPA. Without a predictable and guaranteed funding source, TOPA loses its power to provide tenants with the leverage they need to negotiate with their landlords. When a company by the funding HPTF, the Tenant Opportunity and Purchase Act, is the most important tool we have to preserve affordable rental housing, provide opportunities for homeownership for low-income tenants, minimize displacement, of existing tenants, encourage the formation of tenant organization, and strengthen the bargaining position of district tenants. In other words, the goals of TOPA are multiple, and they are about correcting for the embedded imbalance of power that occurs without a property owner and a tenant. Protecting the interests of the public is one of the main roles of government, and part of that is protecting those who are vulnerable. TOPA gives tenants a tool they can use for leverage. Yes, in some cases, to protect their home, but also, and much more often, it is used to negotiate better living conditions, negotiate fair and predictable rental structures, preserving affordability and stability that goes beyond the market factors. Among many outcomes, it supports long-term housing stability through investing in people who remain and contribute to their communities. But TOPA can only serve this purpose if it is funded through a source that is predicted and guaranteed. Let me go one step further as to why this is so important. TOPA, with funding guaranteed through the Housing Production Trust Fund, achieve a multiplier effect. Although these funds will never be sufficient for tenants to acquire every single building that receives a notice of sale, the fact that we have an established tool funded by the HPDF that protects and gives tenants this possibility to negotiate the purchase of their homes empowers tenants to sit at the negotiation table with their landlords and discuss all of the options to preserve affordability and maintain their homes. To summarize, TOPA is the critical tool to preserve affordable housing by balancing power on both sides of the negotiation table. This can only be achieved if TOPA is backed by a funded and predictable housing production trust fund. TOPA without a funded trust fund is TOPA without teeth. That is why we believe it is extremely important that we maintain the guaranteed and predictable funding of the funding through the deed of recordation tax. And we urge the committee to allocate a higher percentage of the tax to the HPPF to achieve these goals. As I described before, a guaranteed, predictable, non-discretionary funding source is essential to this mission. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Good afternoon, members of the commission. My name is Patrick McEnany. I'm here representing Somerset Development. We are a developer of affordable and mixed income housing here in the district and Baltimore, and we're also the one for-profit represented today on the panel, although we share the mission and spirit of our nonprofit colleagues. And I want to build a little bit on something that Jim and Juan Pablo said quickly, which is to understand the stability of our industry. One big challenge with affordable housing is that even compared to regular real estate, which is very risky and slow, we have a unique set of challenges in that we have to cobble together a whole array of financing tools to make our projects work. Low-income housing tax credits, often paired with bonds from the DC Housing Finance Agency, subordinate loan from the Housing Production Trust Fund, project-based vouchers, often FHA loans. And so our projects often have much longer timelines, and they're also very risky. And with one part of that starts to wobble, the entire deal can go down. And often we have to come up with short-term acquisition financing, whether it's for TOPA or a new construction project, in order to make a deal work, but then we have kind of a ticking clock long-term. So certainly stability is important in general to the real estate development industry, but it's especially important to us because of that unique set of challenges to making our projects work. I do want to pick up on a separate train of thought, which I know was brought up by some members at a previous panel, but is on the issue specifically of tax assessments, how they relate to affordable housing. As a for-profit, we do deal with this in some of our properties, and we do have some ideas of how we might be able to make tax assessments work a little better for affordable housing. And one of the challenges right now is current assessment practices. They're usually based on a property's net operating income, and then you take a standard market cap rate to the NOI to determine the valuation. But that doesn't really take into account the impact that having any recorded affordability covenants on the property has on your evaluation. In practice, in the market, that has a big impact on your value, but it's not reflected in the way properties are taxed now. And that is a big challenge. And so what we recommend is applying a standard 120% adjustment factor to any valuation. So you have a standard market cap rate. It doesn't change the way the assessors come out and look at things. They can still do their same analysis, but then you take 120% adjustment factor. And that's kind of a formulaic, simple, easy to understand approach that can account for affordability covenants and help to protect some of those properties. Another idea we have is a potential alternative or something to explore in addition is the district does have a payment in lieu of taxes, a pilot program that currently only applies to federal properties that have Section 8 subsidies. And so you could also look at that, expanding that program to other properties that have affordability covenants. And another suggestion we have is to explore expanding the district's existing property tax abatement that's tied to nonprofits using low-income housing tax credits to cover any new preservation or production projects that utilize low-income housing tax credits and include recorded affordable housing covenants in perpetuity, which is increasingly the standard now that DHCD is applying for projects that receive Housing Production Trust Fund. But we think basing the exemption on actual affordability covenants and limiting it to projects with perpetual affordability is the most effective way to incentivize high-quality, mission-driven affordable housing work and also protect residents from potential loss of our affordable housing stock. So thank you again for the opportunity to testify and happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Patrick.
Right, members of the commission, on behalf of the National Housing Trust, thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony this afternoon. My name is Carrie Fisher. I'm the Director of Real Estate at National Housing Trust. For over 35 years, NHT has been dedicated to creating and preserving affordable homes to provide opportunity, advance racial equity, reduce economic disparities, and strengthen community resilience through both practice and policy. While the work spans a number of states, we are particularly active in our home community of Washington, D.C., where we work to ensure families and individuals in every neighborhood have access to affordable, healthy, and resilient homes. The residents we serve are working families for whom affordable housing is a lifeline. In DC, we serve over 1,300 extremely low and low-income residents, of which more than 75 of the households earn less than $10,000 annually. Echoing the testimony provided by the speakers that preceded me and is outlined in my written testimony, NHT has strongly supported the deed and recordation tax, which serves as a dedicated source of funding for the Housing Production Trust Fund. Without resources like HPTF, neither nonprofit nor for-profit developers would be able to pursue affordable housing preservation and development projects in DC with the same level of success and impact. Since 2013, HPTF has assisted in the preservation and construction of 6 NHT properties, totaling 805 apartment homes. Furthermore, HPTF success has led to it being held up as a national best practice for all housing policymakers. Within our region, Fairfax County has adopted a similar program, and nationally, cities like Aspen and Los Angeles have looked to HPTF and the mechanism through which it is funded, taxes on real estate, is a model for affordable housing funds. Our tax system should look to address DC's racial and economic inequalities and to build widespread prosperity for all residents. Housing stability is foundational to households' capacity to flourish and intrinsically connected to positive life outcomes. The district goals for improved education, healthcare, and workforce outcomes, which are supported through progressive tax policies such as earned income tax credit and DC child dependent tax, care tax, will be hampered without meaningful investment into safe, affordable housing. National Housing Trust recognizes the responsibility of the DC Tax Revision Commission to balance the needs of residents and industry across the city. We remain steadfast in our mission to expand and preserve affordable housing options for low-income families of all sizes. We hope that the Commission preserves this mission and commitment to affordable housing through maintenance of the deed and recordation tax and its dedicated allocation to the Housing Production Trust Fund. Thank you for this time for this afternoon.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nechama Masliansky. I'm the Senior Sum Advisor at Sum Inc., which is also known as Some Others Might Eat. And I'm here with our President and CEO, Ralph Boyd. Sum started as a soup kitchen 52 years ago, but we are not soup kitchen anymore. We have evolved into social service organization that serves 5,000 people a year with comprehensive services, which I outline in my written testimony. Most pertinent today is that we provide permanent housing. We own more than 45 sites, and we have sites in all 8 wards, as well as a site in West Virginia. Some recognized in 2004 that the lack of affordable housing was driving people into homelessness, and we immediately implemented our housing development initiative. We have since purchased, renovated, or built more than 25 housing sites in the district, currently housing more than 1,000 adults and nearly 400 children. And we are opening more. Virtually all our residents are at 0 to 30% FMI, and nearly all are African American. We subsidize the supportive services that we provide. Some could not have succeeded in meeting its 2004 goals if not for the gap financing made possible by the Housing Production Trust Fund. At least 14 of our sites were awarded HPTF. We're grateful for the investments approved by multiple mayors and district councils in funding HPTF through the sources that you are familiar with. But one wonders about the future stability of the trust fund, given that the FY24 budget approved yesterday brings the total to $100 million. How? By using the last of the district's ARPA funds. $31.9 million of the $100 million comes from federal ARPA. And actually, it is not at $100 million, it's at $94 million. It's important to recognize that putting together the financing stacks for each site has required various combinations of HPTF with local and federal resources, as Patrick outlined. Beyond government sources, we invest massive financial and staff resources to create our units. Our model is that we ourselves are filling gaps. We defer a large portion of our development fee, and we make guarantees that we will finance the deals because we have a strong balance sheet. We build on a 50-year donor base to make the project feasible. We see the HPTF as a worthwhile investment for the district, as I outlined in my written testimony. To summarize, affordable housing stabilizes the community and generates quantifiable social returns. Affordable housing stabilizes each household and enables personal and financial growth, including employment. SUM's accelerated housing program aims to propel families who have experienced homelessness to become homeowners. Development of affordable housing contributes directly to skills building and employment. In considering ways that the tax code can be improved, which we were invited to do, we endorsed the recommendations of Ed Lazier in April 2023 before you, specifically his recommendations relating to the district's earned income tax credit, as was just alluded to by Ms. Fisher. We invite further conversation about a lot of the loose ends that we've each raised. One I'm raising is how we can stabilize the Housing Production Trust Fund after fiscal year 24. The ability to produce affordable housing depends on answering that question. And some agrees with Jim Knight and Jubilee, because we've had similar experiences. We need to find a way to end the necessity to request special legislation every time any of us needs a tax exemption under recurring specific circumstances. Some of our issues had to be addressed last year, for example, in the Budget Support Act to resolve a matter that had been hanging over us for 5 years. So thank you for the opportunity to testify, and thank you for your attention.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Sure.
So I wasn't a scheduled speaker because of our interest and concision for you.
Thank you.
I
You
might
just
be
introduce
for
yourself.
hours. So I'll self-regulate here and remain silent until there's a conversation.
That's great. You want to just introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name's Ralph Boyd and I'm the CEO of SUM.
Nice to see you. Great. Well, thank you all very much for those remarks. I will turn it over to the commissioners too. I should check. Are any commissioners online?
Glenn's on.
Hi, Glenn. You can chime in via chat if he has a question. Question.
Question for Jim and for Patrick. you talked about the SB, having to have an SB to hold the property. What taxes are they subject to? Is it real property, the deed? What is it that the tax exemption that you're looking for?
Seeking an exemption for all of the above. And so right now, if it's a low-income housing tax credit project controlled by a nonprofit, Patrick's on the other side of that, and it's going to have real property and exemption from the recordation of transport tax. So that's the model we'd like to see expanded to the other uses.
So we did that way back when the old, that Ward 6 development was taking place. So if you have LIHTC financing, you don't pay,
Right.
but if you do not, then you pay. That's it.
And we used to all have to get that by special legislation over and over again, and now it's just a blanket. I don't know, Patrick, you might want to comment on expanding it.
Just a little bit, because we've been involved with that kind of piece of legislation since 2005. We went to the council and OTR and proposed a kind of blanket exemption for exactly that kind of housing, truly affordable housing produced by nonprofits under certain circumstances and with criteria that had to be met. And we were told, no, you have to do it site by site, have one bill at a time. Eventually, we did get legislation that allows low-income housing produced by certain nonprofit providers to be exempt, but it was, as we wrote it and as it was passed by the council, it was supposed to apply to housing that was eligible for LIHTC. But as it emerged from the mayor's office and became a law, you actually had to be approved
Yeah.
and actually LIHTC.
I remember this now.
Exactly, had to bill in front of me.
And I
And
think-
what I was talking about.
Yeah,
is real
yeah,
property.
this was the old soldiers' house or the, no.
What turned out to be dispositive for OTR was the nature of the deed holder, which in many of these cases where you have new market tax credits is an LLC that's totally controlled by the 501c3, but that didn't matter. It was a total elevation of form over substance. It's kind of the reverse Enron situation. In the Enron situation, they had all those special purpose entities that they were offloading reserves and liability and debt to. But when it came time for bankruptcy, they just pierced the corporate veil and said, oh, no, this belongs to Enron. Well, it's the same thing here. The 501c3 is the single member of these LLCs, yet they're considered, so the entity, the controlling entity is a nonprofit, and the activities that are occurring are charitable activities. In our case, it was a healthcare center. So the two principal drivers of exemption should be what's the nature of the entity who's operating and owning, and what's the nature of the activity they're engaged in. And in either of those situations, did that matter one iota for the purposes of determining the exemption? So we had to go to the council. Just going to the council every time you have this is costly. Litigate, we hire lawyers to negotiate. It's just principal ought to drive what's the nature of the real entity here, and what's the nature of the activities in which they're engaged. So in the LIHTC space, the fact that it's a LIHTC financing makes it automatic. It doesn't in the non-LIHTC space. The other thing I would point out in our case, and I'm sure you found this, Jim, that the underlying activity was kind of irrelevant. So you're in our situation where you have donors who are paying for the building, paying for the services, and now asked to pay taxes on the provision of that building and those services. It's just an odd, kind of unfortunate reality, and distracting to take these one by one each time when you can have a clearly articulable principle for the exemption. What's the nature of the entity and what's the nature of the activity? In our case, and I'm sure in Jubilee's cases, in both instances, it's a charitable enterprise that is the ultimate controlling entity, and the activities taking place on the subject premises are charitable in nature.
Question to Patrick is, you mentioned having a different cap rate for buildings that have covenants. That's 120% adjustment to the whatever cap rates OTR uses for that neighborhood or that class of property. Do you know if there's enough transaction data to support that? I think that would be important to know if, or are you seeing, because we know the actual cap rates of buildings that were sold. I just don't know where to look at for this data.
Yeah, I mean, it's based on our experience that we see roughly that kind of premium in the market, the discount, I should say, in the market. But that's kind of based on our experience with our property that we're looking at, we're talking about brokers. I don't have kind of a holistic data set to say beyond our individual experience, but certainly happy to.
Can you also explain 120% better? Is it 120 basis points? Like, I didn't tell.
Yeah, it's 1.2 as far as a discount factor, so it's really, we're actually talking about essentially 20% discount. Yeah, so think of it as a discount rate of 1.2 that you divide by 1.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, this is maybe a general question, because the 100 million is sort of it's not a floor we can't go dip below, but hopefully a floor you want to keep. I'm just curious though, we had the last couple of years, much bigger investments in the Housing Production Trust Fund, that I imagine allowed us to expand the
Big
production.
pipeline as a consequence.
Yeah, and so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, but also just like, what do you think is actually needed? So 100 million sounds like, please don't let us drop below this, but what's actually needed to tackle the magnitude of the problem?
We had been advocating 2 years ago, before the COVID dollars came in, for $200 to $250 million floor. And the mayor was talking about that as well.
And
yeah,
we're taking a shot at trying to model the ideal number.
Yeah, recently, Jim and I and some other folks in this space tried to right-size the need for housing production trust fund dollars with the bond cap, which is set federally. Because what ended up happening with that huge influx of dollars is everybody rushed in and then we hit the bond cap. And now we're doing this every 6-month cycle with DCHFA. So we were trying to right-size what would it take to kind of have those things move in concert and potentially have a little bit of extra HPTF for projects that don't use bond cap, that might just use a straight HPTF deal, or they just might need some additional carrying costs or some other things that were thought of being in there. So in our analysis, I think it was 311 million was kind of that right sizing amount. And then I think our initial internal conversations in CNHUD were with those additional funds that in the HPTF, we might want to ask for somewhere closer to like 330, 340 million. But then we moderated those asks to the council when the realities of revenue projections came in. And so we right-sized our HPTF ask to 200 million, and then the mayor proposed 100 in the council.
Yeah, if I may, to figure out what that is going forward, we've been pulling together data to see what the size of the current pipeline is and what the projections are for the pipeline 6 months out, a year out, so we can have an informed view of what that floor number or that ideal number will be. But we realize, say 300 million in this budget environment, good look at an appropriation.
There's a requirement to spend half of that funding on 30% and below. It sometimes feels to me like an unfunded mandate because we still need the operating subsidies. Because your $311 million.
Bless you, yes.
It doesn't. So.
I'd also mention it also can be a challenge for preservation. If you're doing a preservation deal and folks in a building have whatever mix of incomes they have, often that is where you're going to see folks who maybe 80% of very median income, and you're not trying to kick people out when you're doing preservation. But if the Housing Production Trust Fund is mandated that to be so prioritizing 30% units, it has an unintended consequence of really penalizing preservation projects and focusing on new construction projects that can apply for those vouchers don't have to worry about whatever the incomes of the people who already live in the building are. So I think that's actually one really unintended consequence of that.
Would it make sense to eliminate the 30 and 50% requirements and interfere from the rent side to get there? Because that will free up capital fields.
I would not like to see that happen, honestly. I think then the rents are gonna slide back up to 60 where they used to be for the LIHTC program anyway. And the mandate, although we don't reach it, does create some energy, both at DHCD and batteries.
But I think it might be helpful to say it's an aspirational goal. I think that DHC gets very penalized for not being able to meet an unrealistic target. And so I agree. I don't think it means you want to totally get rid of it, but I think you need some clarification that it's honestly a realistic goal to hit, and the staff shouldn't feel like they've done a bad job or the Housing Production Trust has failed. This is not meeting.
I said one more thing on that point and get it back. So you asked us what the right amount of trust fund is, and we tied that to the bond cap. Really ought to tie LRSP to the 50% of the HPTF, and those three things ought to go in proportion over and over and over again. We've just not, as a city, been able to get there.
No, and I was going to come back to the point of the 30% MI, and like to understand how critical is the funding to support those people that needs the most. We are seeing something that we have not been seeing ever. Right now, to develop a single unit of 30% AMI, you need 100% of subsidy. Right now, the maximum that somebody at 30% AMI can pay a rent a month is the same or almost the same of how much it costs to operate that rental unit. That means if you use every single dollar that the person has to pay for the maximum of what the 30% AMI unit can pay for, and that's something that is published by the Department of Housing and Community Development, like if I don't remember correctly, for one bedroom it's $810, with the utility allowance it's like 700 pennies. Right now, to manage, to do like the good management, operating expenses of a rental property, you need the same $600+ per unit a month. That means that we need to understand how important is the funding for those people that is every single dollar that you need to put there is to develop the unit. You need 100% of subsidy for them. And that's why it's super important that we have the funding there to support those people. Yeah, it's critical. Like it has never happened like that. Like in the past, we saw like 70%, 65, 75% subsidy needed. But now it's almost going to 100% of the fund needed to develop that unit.
Questions? Hey, Mayor Williams, welcome. You were down at the Wilson Building on a very important mission. With apologies for the fact that you've missed much of overlay. Any questions you want?
Exchange was important as part of our exchange with all the different stakeholders. Geographically, sector-wise, in this case, so thank you for spending time with us.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Can you all speak a little bit to one of the, we've also heard a little bit about programs that provide direct assistance to both renters and homeowners through the tax code, the Schedule 8 circuit breaker program and other programs. How do those programs play into your thinking about affordability, how we can improve housing affordability in the district? And do you have any specific suggestions for us on how those programs could do a better job of that?
So in Schedule 8, we haven't used it much, and I think I understand that it's not really an eligible use for a renter in an affordably subsidized property. So I understand it's more for an owner, somebody owns the building and leases it to someone else, that person.
Yeah, it's a direct, it's a renter, for instance, or a homeowner applies direct, gets it directly
Most
through
of
the
our
income.
products tax exempt to begin with, there's no eligibility for the residents who live in our property. So if it could be expanded to include them, that $12.50 a year would be very welcome to folks coming in from the wage. But I don't think it's currently eligible and subsidized out. Am I reading that right?
Good question.
That's related to the tax obligation, so if there's no tax obligation, how we.
Right, yeah, exactly. You have to have so it's for properties that have tax obligations. It's supposed to offset the property.
Yes. That's an interesting point. Okay. Where's JP?
I'm just curious also in the moment, this is kind of different tack. But because, you know, we've had a lot of conversations here and the other developer panel that we had talked about kind of the lending environment, or the financing environment right now. And I wonder how that is for you all. Like, are you having trouble attracting capital?
Bond
being-
cap.
Get
Bond
financing?
cap.
The bond cap.
Slowing everything down, slowing the pipeline down. It's a big concern. We're trying to come up with a solution to manage it. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but we're going to be proposing a bridge fund that we'll try to pull together and would allow folks whose financing closings are slowed by the cap to borrow their pre-development costs and their carry costs from that fund so that the slowdown in the closing doesn't stop the production pipeline, if you will. So we're spending a lot of herbs of intellectual energy trying to figure that out. So yeah, it's a,
So it really impacts our ability to acquire new sites. Once we have them under control, once we get to the front of the line and the trust fund closed, the construction financing is not hard to get. But it's pretty speculative right now to buy property saying there's going to be trust fund and bond cap available when. So if the building doesn't have a positive cash flow, I mean, hold it. That's why some, it's raising millions of dollars a year
So it's
just to
not,
hold the building.
it's not the getting the capital lean on, it's the.
it's
I mean,
holding
there-
the moment.
It's holding it, but then you do have to, you don't know when you might get an HPTF award and be able to secure the bond.
Broader real estate market. Yeah. Or capital markets are closed.
Well, I would say we are seeing this challenge for short-term acquisitions as well. And certainly, I think we're in the same boat where owners are reluctant to start dropping their prices if they know in theory that they're gonna have to take some hits, but they're sitting on the same as homeowners who don't want to list their house on the market right now, especially if they're sitting on a low mortgage. So we have not, when we're going out and looking at properties, there's a disconnect in the market still. Where the capital markets are seizing up, it's getting much harder for us to finance, and sellers don't really want to part at a more reasonable value. So I'm not sure when things are gonna break, when they're gonna adjust, but just not working very well. And then we have could take years and years and years before we're through on the other side, so.
And I would
acquisitions are
say
scary.
too, for some of the deals that we are doing, you know, there are community development financial institutions, NHG is one, that are able to use like capital magnet fund from the federal government to help bring down the cost of some of those acquisition loans, to help folks be able to save a little bit money upfront while we're putting together the whole financing stack to do either a new construction or a preservation project.
One of the areas I touched on, that we have to delve into for a lot of reasons, budgetary, but specifically time-wise, related to what's on mandate kind of questions, but is regulation. And I'm wondering, we were talking about, you know, initial funding for the projects, getting the project started because of the carrying costs of the property, carrying costs of capital, whatever. You find regulation, is that a regulation, entitlements and all that? Is that a problem for your projects?
I mean, we certainly run into the same problems with zoning, because I would say any developer does in the city, and having to deal with a lot of discretionary processes if you're trying to get, you said, entitled. We certainly have several projects we're looking at right now that it's a gauntlet you have to run, and certainly there have been, you know, efforts through the comprehensive plan so far to try and make that a little better. I would say it's really unlock the potential. We have so much potential that we could unleash if we were to have more across the board opportunities to change entitlements, especially if there were automatic processes for projects that achieve certain thresholds of affordability. I think it's really important. It's kind of the golden goose we're sitting on, that we know we have incredibly high housing costs. We know we have a supply challenge, and we know we were to look at reforming entitlements and providing more opportunities for us as affordable developers and the market rate developers as well to build. We could dramatically increase revenue, bring down costs, and get the city's budget a little better. And I know there's hesitance to deal with the problem because folks don't like buildings, but it's, I think, the key to unlocking everything.
That's interesting, and I know it's not good, but that's interesting. I think that people agree.
Yeah, we had the building permit process in Texas the same way.
That is, issues.
Our affordable units are the city. That number.
I used to know, but I don't. You know,
I'm gonna put that.
So before you came in, Mayor, I will say that the trust fund is on schedule to produce just over 20,000 units. I'm going to tell a story earlier when you weren't here that involved you.
When I worked in, when I first started in, public policy, whatever you want to call it, was working in Boston for this entity called the BRA, Boston Development Authority. We had this guy, Steve Coyle, who was a big tornado. He was totally in the results. He came into his meeting and he would ask how everything's going, and you told him, oh, I had these phone calls, arranged these meetings. He would start screaming. It was all about what he was producing. One of his big connections way before his time was connecting, economic feasible, social responsibility. It was always about connecting the projects we were doing. Social responsibility. So we had this project we were doing downtown, 400,000 square feet. And the benefits from the project, jobs and housing, tied to Roxbury, where we were building a new police station and development around the police station, tying. So this is a long-winded way of saying the motivation behind what really energetically funding the housing project. Yeah, that's what it was. So you have all this development now happening in DC. It's the kind for social responsibility. That was the motivation.
This is all subsidized.
Now we need to look at alternatives.
And now we're
Since
doing-
you've got, yeah.
Not more, that many of those are.
20,000.
How many was it?
32,000. This is since 2018. I don't think the data goes back to earlier, but that's when the housing production transform was released. And can I ask a question about you mentioned that obviously it could be a very valuable tool about if you mix it with housing production trust fund. But we also hear a lot of complaints about TOPA when affordable housing developers are trying to sell properties to others or to themselves, and the TOPA comes in the way. What are your thoughts on how? So, I'm just curious what your thoughts are on this.
Thoughts on what?
TOPA, the tenant opportunity to purchase. Sometimes when affordable housing developers and owners are trying to do these transactions, it gets in the way.
So you probably have to start another meeting because this is it. I'd say 5 of our last 7 developments have been TOPA assignments, and one of them got caught in that right-hand collecting. But that is largely, I've seen anybody disagrees, that's largely been solved by the provisions to the exemption definition a couple of years ago. So when the same owner controls it before the sale and after the sale, and it remains affordable.
And there's still notice periods that need to be complied with, but then there are ways to kind of shorten that down through engagement with the residents as well.
And TOPA is critical, but it's critical not only, I try to say that, but it's not only in terms of the tenants having the opportunity to acquire the building. But it's critical in that negotiation process that tenants can sit with the landlords. And if they accept the new buyer coming and buying, like sit with the new buyer and discuss maximum rents, discuss improvements in the property, discuss increases for the next 5 years. Maybe the actual transactions, like maybe 3, 4, 5% of the total notice that are sent, but a good chunk of them, 30, 40, 50% of them are able to negotiate between the tenants and or the new owners or themselves assigning the right to somebody else. We have been receiving, we have been acquiring, Mikasa has been acquiring buildings that were assigned by tenants, and we were able to acquire the building, maintaining funding, getting lighted funding, and renovate the properties. And the same people that have been living in those units for many, many years can be there with an affordable rent. That will never count as the tenants acquire the unit. But a very important end happens there. You have a very unbalanced power. And with TOPA, you give the tenants that level of power to negotiate this very unbalanced power.
There are stories that the same assignment can actually be used for displacement purposes. I assign you my rights, you give me $20,000 or $2,000 and send me to London County. How often do you see this, or do you see this?
I will say it is still, so TOPA is triggered by redevelopments. I think the exemptions we're talking about are for, when you're renovating a unit or just transferring an LP. And so it's triggered automatically by demolition as well. And it's certainly something we've seen where we often pass on deals now if we're brought to TOPA deals coming, and we actually one of the developers that will come and talk, and we're often used as a stalking horse to just bid up the price. It's actually the tenants are looking for a payment, and that's not necessarily wrong. Right? That's a switch from it's not being affordable housing focused to tenant equity focused, and maybe that also serves an important social goal of one model why it's different from the outcome being affordability. The outcome there is essentially tenants getting some of the equity from the property value, but it's certainly in our experience different than what it was 20 years ago, and that we see that more often than we used to, and often we don't pursue as many projects as a result.
If I might add, CNHED was contracted by the council to do an in-depth analysis of TOPA. And so, so we have, working with the Urban Institute with the CBOs to collect data, and that should be published on September 30th, so before you finished your work. But we are looking at those outcomes, really trying to assess the benefits to tenants. And I think, as you mentioned, tenants taking $2,000 or $20,000, one of the key differences there is whether the tenants really understand their TOPA rights, because you want more for that when you actually understand what your rights value are versus potentially other efforts to kind of undermine your ability to learn more about your rights. And I think that's one of the outcomes, those buyout outcomes, something we're going to try to address and get information on. Because I think that there is a reality there of there's an affordability piece of obtaining these properties, but also for those households, they have an opportunity probably for the first time in their life to get $30,000 or $40,000 to be able to support their family, to be able to put their kids in college, right? And so is that a bad outcome of TOPA, or is it just a different outcome? And those are something that we're going to try to make sure we capture in our report.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's just the wealth transfer from one person to another. But the stated goals of TOPA is always keeping both in place, at least. So I'm very excited about this debate, so forward to that.
One thing, not to dwell too much more on TOPA, but I think one thing that the jury's still very out long term of seeing the impact of is we obviously had a long pause on TOPA during the pandemic, about 18 months as part of the emergency legislation. which was very unprecedented, very new, and I think we're gonna have to see very long-term how that impacts investors, Utopia, however, use the market, because there's kind of now this precedent for these traditional set timelines.
And I've also linked to that question earlier about how the capital markets impact TOPA opportunity. You want to be the developer that gets the right assigned, and you're going to purchase, take it to affordability, can you get that acquisition capital? With the question over trust fund dollars, bond cap dollars, it's harder and harder to get that acquisition.
Sure. Hey, do you mind if I address one other thing? Please. Guys, I heard it in a previous panel and today in the Washington Business Journal, there was a piece about reforming the tax code. And I think there's this narrative that high-income earners are fleeing the district because of high taxes, that high-income earners fled California and they all packed up and they moved to Texas because the taxes are lower. That's not an accurate representation. It's not the high-income earners that are fleeing. I believe data in the district shows that we had more high-income filers last year than in the previous year. So it's not that that's what's happening. It's the people who can't afford their housing in California have to go to a cheaper housing market, and so they're moving to Texas. These are your low and moderate income folks who are more transient, who can find jobs in those areas and need lower rent, right? And I think it ties directly into the work that these folks do every day, is try to make sure that those folks don't have to leave the district in order to afford their rent, that they can stay here, they can raise their families here, and they can have access to opportunities. So I just wanted to kind of address that, because I know it was said previously, and that narrative, I just wanted.
I think a lot of people here would see you on the latter point, we'd have an argument on the first point.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of we're probing this, and there's a lot of literature out there in the media and academic reflecting on higher income. I mean, the New York Times of all places say high income people fleeing New York. This is New York Times. That you're under, but I think a lot of people would agree. A lot of people leave big blue states because of housing costs, unfortunately.
I would agree with that. I just define plan. And are we moving people into like where there's more profit?
You said,
I think that I don't know what the cutoff is for high income earners. I would never. I think we need more affordable housing. A whole lot of thoughts about that, but nobody would argue with that. I would just say at what level are we cutting off from defining high income earners? Because I think we are losing some. I think there's a lot of data that does show we are, but are we moving some people into high income earners? Is that expanding to job, whatever?
Yeah, another,
Detail around that.
yeah, if
But I
you
think
guys,
we're conceding to you, we're agreeing with you that our goal is for this housing, but
Yeah.
choices.
But I think somebody brought this up. I think it's so important we think about supply. Because the only thing that is going to bring housing into affordability is additional supply. And we can think about all the work that you guys do, which is phenomenal. Think about the work that we all try to do when we build residential drainage, but it is supply. We have to figure out supply in a major way in the city.
yeah, I
How
mean,
would you, if I ask you all, how would you, if you could, or maybe you can, how would you propose we, pursue, advocate, whatever the word, policies that would create naturally affordable housing? In other words, the market's creating the housing and it's affordable, just that we're in the right space, equilibrium wise. How would you try to do that? One way is, people have said, is that we can remove a lot of constraints at the height limit just mentioned. We can remove a lot of pressure on height. These buildings are more economical, you're gonna reduce the cost of housing. But that's,
Homes have more.
right, you have more
And
housing.
as we run, you have major
23, 24.
I would actually,
Be asking you guys, what do you think?
I think looking at the height limit is one angle. I think what's interesting when you really think about the cheapest housing to build is often the lowest density housing. And I think where we really have massive opportunity is by increasing gentle density, missing middle housing throughout wide swaths of the city, especially the parts that are the wealthiest and traditionally the most exclusive. I think one really unique tool that we have is HUD now publishes every year something called a small area fair market rent. They no longer just look at the whole metro area and say, what's the fair market rent for DC? They say, by every zip code, every year, what is the rent? And what that means is we have a powerful tool to see where rents are by zip code and an objective government, federal government finance metric. You could actually potentially turn into a trigger for saying, your neighborhood, if this zip code, the small area fair market rents are now above the overall fair market rent in the metro area. That could trigger an automatic increase in density. Say you can suddenly build row homes in that area instead of a single family detached. You can go from one single family detached home to 3, even just single family row homes. So you're tripling the density, and it's an automatic trigger that also kicks in. It's not focusing on low-income areas where people are concerned about displacement and concerned about maintaining affordability. It's targeting areas that are already gentrified and are the richest. So if I could snap my fingers, that would be my one recommendation.
There will be
Market
coordinated action to rent to relatives.
Paris says the same, this Paris is roughly the same square miles as DC. 2 million more and a half population because it's much more dense.
So not a CNHED position.
Yeah, that is.
But Portland, Oregon did something called they have a residential infill program. Essentially, single-family homeowners by right are allowed to build up to a quadplex on their property. And then if they agree to either through homeownership or through rental, that half the properties will be affordable, you can do up to 6. So you have to meet other parameters, and as long as it will fit on the property, but essentially by right, you are now allowed to do significantly more density. So that meets that kind of missing middle piece. And then Cambridge, Massachusetts, and more recently, I think Annapolis, Maryland, have just both passed. Cambridge was in 2020. They did an affordable housing overlay over all of Cambridge. And what that does is it reduces parking requirements, increases height limits, essentially reduces setbacks. And so you can get more units on the project, but you have to be at 100% affordable housing.
Some in Cambridge, they're going to.
Yeah. So, and what that does is that unlocks certain smaller parcels of land that might not have been economical prior. Now you can really fill out that land. You might be able to turn those projects or turn that into an affordable project. So that's just another.
You want to say that?
They don't want to stay forever. Go ahead.
No, also not the position, but now that we are brainstorming, if we want to go even farther than that, we can always have mandate affordability levels for any single development that is being done in town. We'll have a revolution of like developers saying, no way. And at the end of the day, if you think like we have IC units, like you request for an increase on a change in the zone and a percentage trigger, and you need to have affordable units. But you can have mandatory, like affordability, having X percentage of units being affordable per each developer in town that you do. The issue is, like somebody who said, that will make the things significantly more expensive. Maybe yes in the beginning, because you cannot get as much income from the units. At the end of the day, everything will adjust on the price of the land, like little by little will adjust on the price of the land. Of course, landowners will not like it because the price of land will be lower, but you will have organically some development of affordable housing by law, like 15% of the unit being for 30% AMI, like that. Nothing.
So these are unrehearsed, unscripted responses. We might get mad at each other, so I'll take that risk. Similar idea there. I think the market is going to charge as much as it can because that's what it's motivated to do. or we're gonna have the affordable housing programs that we do, and then nobody's producing anything in the middle. I'd like to see a similar mandate idea. I'd rather see IZ at 100% AMI and then a fractional number of units at 60 and 80 that you can't sell anywhere. They're not homeowners. Part and draw people of middle income into those developments. It's not as big a stretch. Let us have the resources that do the deeper affordability. I think the system will calibrate to that more. The market rate community would probably perceive less loss selling and renting in 100% AMI as it would at 60%. Development.
And another, just we're brainstorming. There's also, if you guys have read much on like land value taxes.
Yeah.
Land value taxes are like an interesting idea as well, where particularly on like low use or vacant lots. And what that would allow then is you'd have significantly less tax on the improvement on the land, but you'd have a significantly higher tax on, on like single level, maybe like a box store or a vacant lot is going to pay significantly more in taxes. And so the idea there is that we should incentivize them to maximize the utility of the land.
I actually looked into that, but it's the zoning that makes that ineffective. So that turns land value tax into just a stick and not a carrot, because you don't have sufficient, like, we're already built up to the zoning in parts of the city where you need development the most. So, that does nothing in Ward 3, that does nothing in outside of what we're already doing, right? Maybe our Union Market, Poplar Point, that's already happening. So that should go along with zoning reform.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of people in Union Market that are long-term owners, generational in that, and if you did that, you're forcing them to sell. They cannot carry that higher taxes. And so then you're kind of. Right.
Yeah, that's a good point, but I wonder what the zoning is in all those slopes of like. Like lots of single family.
We got a historical book.
All right.
No.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you all so much for coming in. Really appreciate it. As I said, we'll be taking up these ideas and we're starting.
Appreciate your service. This is a lot of service.
Thank you guys. Thank you guys for being here.
Thank you.
Have a great evening.
Me too.